Hi everybody, it's Susan from Sunrise Quilt Studio, and today I have a video for you on quilting the Sew by Row quilt. And I've got this fast forward about 2 times, so it's looks like I'm quilting really fast. Well, that's just because I have it sped up a little bit here. That way the video won't be an hour long. This is the first row, the top row, and it's the row with the scissors. And on this row, I had already sewn on the buttons, and as you can see here, they're in the way of my ruler work, so I can't hold my ruler flat all the time. Sometimes I have to angle it up like that, so that's not the best way to quilt. And luckily, that's the only row of blocks that I put any buttons on before I quilted it. So the rest of it went easier. Now for the sashing on the outside of the row, there's a little filler strip there that's about 3 inches wide, and I did a herringbone pattern right there to fill that space. And here I'm doing more stitch in the ditch around the scissors, and then doing an outline, a 1/4 inch outline. So nothing elaborate in this quilt at all, other than the outer border. I did do a feather. That's a feather wreath all the way around that quilt, and I don't have any video of doing that, but I've done that several times on other quilts, so you can see that. And I also have a playlist on feather quilting, so you can see how I do the different feathers on the long arm. So since I did the feathers in the outer border, the quilting within the quilt is a little bit dense. When you're quilting this quilt, you don't have to do a custom job on this quilt. You can do an overall. Of course, that applies to any quilt. You don't have to do a custom job on any quilt. You can always do an overall pantograph on a quilt top. But I don't like doing pantos because I have to do them from the back of my machine, and I can't see what's going on the quilt top. And a lot of times in the past, what has happened is the thread has broken, or I've run out of bobbin and didn't know it, and I'm just happily quilting along. And then when I get that row done and I go check to see what it's like, then I realize half of it hasn't been quilted because I either ran out of bobbin or the thread broke. And if I had the alarms turned off on the machine, I wouldn't know it. So I just don't like doing pantos. So I don't do them very often. But with these scissors, the pieces that form the scissors are very narrow. They're like 1/2 inch wide. So they don't need any quilting within them, but you need to quilt around them. So that's what I'm doing. I'm just filling up space around all of the scissors there so that you can see the design and everything is balanced. So all the quilting within this quilt is working on balancing everything out so that one section isn't quilted any denser than another section. And I'm doing pebbles inside here. That's what I'm doing inside the scissor holes, the handles there, is doing some pebbles. So pull the machine back so you can look at that a little bit better. And then I'll pop up a photograph here of a closer view of some scissors so that you can see what that looks like. Okay, the second row is the tomato pincushions, and once again, I didn't do anything elaborate in here. I'm basically just going around the designs here, the pattern, the pincushions, and then I'm going to go up here to the sashing that is in between the rows and quilting in some large pebbles there. And then inside the tomato pincushion, I'm just doing a stipple. And I know stipple is not very popular anymore, but it is fast and it is effective. And I used it quite a bit in this quilt actually. So I did try to do a design, a curved design within the blocks, and I really didn't like the way it looked. So I ripped that out and just did the stippling. So yeah, I think it worked real well, and it was effective. So I think that's all that counts. Now the embroidery work is done on the left upper corner of the pin cushions, and those will get little buttons sewn on to the end of those. Those are the pins that are sticking out of the pin cushions. So these blocks went really fast. There was a lot of them though in that row. I can't remember exactly how many, but there were a lot. But they didn't need much quilting and they were small. So here is a row of 4 of them. I think there was like 10 or 12 or something like that in there, all a different color. And now I'm working on the sewing machines. Now those took the most time. There's only 3 blocks though, but you know, they're big, so they took quite a bit of time. I'm doing some outline quilting here. I'm just going around the entire piece here, and that just helps stabilize, which I feel is important when you have a big piece like this. You don't want it to start shifting on you. It doesn't shift a whole lot with the batting that I'm using. I'm using an 80-20 batting, but if you were using a polyester batting, I don't know if you've ever noticed that, but I notice if I use polyester batting, things like to shift because it doesn't grab the fabric very well, and so sometimes the fabric will slide on you, at least a lot more than it will on a cotton or a 80-20 batting. So I'm still quilting in the ditch here. I am using a white thread by Omni, and I think it's a cotton polyester thread, and it works really well in the machine. I used to use mostly just YLI. That's gotten harder to source right now, so I'm using Omni, and it works really well. And here I'm quilting in the ditch on the sachet between the 2 blocks. And trimming all my threads, and I think I'm doing more stitch in the ditch. There's a lot of stitch in the ditch in this quilt. I did quite a bit of that. So if you haven't sewn your blocks on this quilt yet and you want to do some custom quilting and you're going to be stitching in the ditch, then you'll want to press your seams to one side so that you will have a ditch. But if you've been quilting on a machine long enough, you know that. You know how that works. Otherwise, you're going to have to decide which fabric you want to quilt on, either the background or the block fabric. And I'm doing some stippling in the background here, and on this piece that is the spool of thread, I'm just doing some horizontal lines. They're 1/4 inch apart, and I'm stippling in the background here to get from one section to the other. That came in real handy. And then I'm just quilting in a couple of vertical lines here on the hand wheel of the machine, and then stippling down the side there. Now you notice here I do not have the buttons sewn in this block here. I didn't feel it was a really wise thing to do. They were going to get in the way. And here I'm doing some herringbone in the sashing. So I'm doing designs that they're effective, but they're quick to do, and help save me some time because I am really short on time right now. And so I'm trying to get all of my quilts done on the machine before I have to do something with my machine. With a move coming up, I was hoping I'd be able to store the machine somewhere, but all the storage units I've looked at, they're only 10 feet deep, and I have a 14-foot table, so it's not going to work. So more than likely I'm going to have to sew the machine unless we can find a rental that has a basement where we can put the machine. So we haven't gotten to that point yet. So I'm working now with the thought that I may have to sell my machine during this transition time. So I hate to do that, but I think that's probably going to be our only solution at this point. So I'll have to either buy a machine or go to quilting on my domestic machine. And the domestic machine I have right now is not going to work for the kind of quilting that I do. Not for big projects. It works great for small projects, but for a big quilt, it's not going to work because there's not enough harp space. So I may have to get a different machine. So that's not a bad thing. Just kind of the way things go. But anyway, the quilting that I'm doing is quick, and the reason I'm doing that is because I'm kind of running out of time. Our goal was to have the house on the market in August. I don't think we're going to make it because the project my husband's doing outside is taking longer than we anticipated. So hopefully by September is kind of what we're aiming for right now. Okay, here I am quilting about 1/4 of an inch inside the seam lines all the way around the machine, and then I'm going to do some freehand quilting within that space. And when you're doing freehand quilting in a piece like that, you don't have to do that outline quilting. I just like the look, so I do that. And then down here on the base of the machine, I'm going to be doing some echo lines here. So I'm starting 1/4 inch away from the piecing, and then we'll go just keep echoing that 1/4 inch line until the space is full. And I'm using a larger ruler here because I'm working with a larger space. So that makes things a little bit easier. And I did have to stop and change the bobbin thread, I believe, at that point. I went through a lot of bobbins. This quilting was dense enough that I think I used about a dozen bobbins on this project, which isn't the most I've ever used. I've had projects where I've used more than 40 bobbins, so this is not as dense as I have quilted in the past, but it's dense enough. So I'm just going around, and this does take time. Those little 1/4 inch lines, especially in these big spaces, it takes time. So just have to work with it. And I did try and do it at a time where I wasn't rushed. And I usually don't work more than 2 hours straight because of my back issues. That's usually about all I can handle. So I'll do it for about 2 hours and then give it a break. So I quilted this top over about 5 days. So it did take time, and but I like the outcome. Now the quilting that I'm doing here, this freehand quilting, it's the little flower with a leaf design. I wanted to do something different than the stippling that was in the background, and I wanted it to be more predominant in the background. So I did the little flower. It's a 3-petal flower with a leaf. And I think if you've watched my videos recently, you probably have seen that several times because I have used that lately quite a bit. It's one of my favorite fillers. So I am in stitch regulated mode here. I did go to manual mode at one point, and if I can remember, I'll point that out to you when we get to that. But I think that is done. And then here are a couple of close-up photos of the sewing machines. So there's the green one, and then the blue one next to it, and then the red one is on the other side, right there. So in this one you can see the little flower and leaf motif pretty well in the sewing machine. Okay, these are the piece blocks, and I can't remember the name of this block, but I really like the block. And here I'm doing the sashing, so I'm stitching in the ditch around the sashing and then doing the pebbles. And that sashing strip is about 1 inch wide, I believe. So it's large pebbles. And it just gives a little different texture. And then on this piece, I did all straight line quilting in the background as well as within the block. So just lots of ruler work. And then just stitching in the ditch to get where I need to go. So I believe I was able to get all the way around these blocks without breaking thread. And to do that, sometimes you have to backtrack or stitch in the ditch, but you know, just do whatever works best for you. And it's just experience. I'm not real good at looking at a quilt and then knowing exactly where I need to go so that I don't have to backtrack, but I don't mind backtracking, so it's not an issue for me. I'd rather just get in there and start quilting and not worry about backtracking. The only thing I do try to avoid is backtracking more than 3 times over the same space because of the thread buildup, especially if I'm using a 40 text or 40 weight thread, the heavier threads. If I'm using a 60 or a 50 weight thread, then it's not quite so much of an issue. You can lay down more than 3 layers in the same place and you don't get the build-up look. And in these star points here, I'm doing, I'm doubling up the quilting. And as far as those little V marks that I'm doing, I'm just doubling them up, just bringing one in a little closer than the other. And so it's just echoing it is what it's doing. And it just fills up space, and it's the same look. So I just like the way those look. I think it helps make those star points show up a little bit better. And I haven't marked anything and nothing is measured. So it's just when I go into the second one, I just move the ruler just a little bit and just kind of try to stop in the center so that the points are lined up with those arrows. And then I cross hatched in the center where the 9 patch is. So there, that block is done. So those blocks were all the same. I mean, each one has different fabrics in it, but I mean, it's the same block all the way through, just like the rest of the quilt. Each row is the same block, just repeated with different fabrics. So here is a close-up of that block I just completed. And next is the irons. On here I did the embroidery for the cord, but I forgot to do the embroidery for the plug, so I'll have to do that yet. And that is just a little bit of embroidery. I just missed it when I was doing it before I put the quilt together. Now the background is all stippling, and you can see here that when I came to the plug, I just stitched around it in the ditch, and you can see that I am quilting right on top of that embroidery. The thread blends in so well with the fabric that you don't even notice that it's the quilting has gone over the embroidery. And you could try, if you don't want to, you can do your background quilting around that embroidery. Or you can put the embroidery on after you've quilted it, and then you don't have to worry about your quilting being on top of the embroidery. Now, just like the sewing machines, I stitched in the ditch around the irons too. And on the handle, I went in 1/4 of an inch. And on the narrow part of the handle, it was only a 1/2 inch wide to begin with, so I could only put 1 line of quilting in there. But on the thicker part, there are 2 lines in there. And then I just separated. The sole of the iron is also a little 1/2 inch strip, so I didn't do any quilting within there. It's quilting in the ditch around that I felt was enough quilting, and it didn't really need stitching within there, but you certainly can add it in there if you want. And then once again, I'm echo quilting on the base of the iron, a little 1/4 inch spacing between lines of quilting. And the ruler is the Handy Quilter. I couldn't remember the brand name. It's Handy Quilter Mini Scalloped Ruler is what that is. That's one of my favorite rulers to use in spaces that are small. And here is one of the irons, all quilted. And then next is the row of spools. Now there were a lot of rows. There were a lot of spools, and so I didn't do anything elaborate on these either. I just stitched in the ditch, and then I did a 1/4 inch spacing, echoing all the way down to imitate thread on the spool. And then those little pieces, background pieces in between, I just stippled between the spools. So there really isn't much room to do much of anything between those. Those are just really narrow. I think there's about 1 inch there. So I'm adjusting the camera here. And here you can see what I'll do between the spaces here. There's just a little stipple. So it's just a small meander. And as I mentioned further, you don't see that a whole lot anymore. It's not real popular, but I like it, and I don't do it much anymore either. But I don't just working on this quilt. I just felt like it was a good time to use it, so I did. And then here I'm doing the 1/4 inch rows of quilting here, and just sliding the ruler along. And there, that one is done. Just finish up the stipple at the bottom, and then stitch in the ditch to the next one. So this row went pretty fast. It's a real narrow row. The spools aren't very large, and I think it just worked out really well. Okay, and the last row is the stack of fabric, and here you can see I'm doing the stipple in the background, the meander quilting, and I've already done the pebbles in the sashing. So on this block, I decided not to quilt within the block. I'm just stitching in the ditch between each piece. These are narrow pieces once again, and so I'm just letting the fabric speak for itself, and just stitching in the ditch. So I'm just kind of working around the piecing there and backtracking where I need to. And there I ran out of bobbins, so I have to go back and put another bobbin in. Here we go. And then I can finish this up. So it's a little bit tedious doing these little tiny sections here, those little triangles there on the end. but it wasn't too bad. So there, that block is done. So I just repeated that for all the blocks. Now those stacks of fabric are different heights. There's some that are short like that one, and then there are others that are taller, that are the full length of the block. But I did them all the same way. I just did a stipple in the background and stitched in the ditch between the different fabrics and the ribbon on there, and that's all I did for those. So anyway, this was a fun quilt to make. It was a long project. It's been over a year. A lot of that just was. This was a quilt-along. The pattern's by Lori Holt, and she had instructions on her blog, I believe, and she did one video on it. And I think this is a pattern that she had done before, and she recolored it with her new fabric. And there were, I think Riley Blake had a series of the videos on how to sew those blocks, if I remember correctly. But it was a fun project. It was one of those where, you know, you worked with some tiny pieces, but she has methods to follow that make it easier to work with. So it's just a fun little quilt, and I really enjoyed it. And it really cheers up my quilting space. So here's the picture of the blocks, and then here are some more pictures of the completed quilt. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and if you did, please click that like button. Don't forget to subscribe if you haven't already, and click that notification bell so you'll be notified when the next video comes up. And in the meantime, I hope you're all staying safe and healthy, and I'll see you in the next video.
Thanks for watching. For more quilting ideas, click on the video links. And to keep up with my latest projects, click on the subscribe button. I hope to see you again soon.